This episode's book is Arrow of God by Chinua Achebe. It's the third of his African trilogy and the last one that I own, and therefore the last one we'll be reading by Chinua Achebe. Much like the other two books, however, this book does deal with uh, the rise of colonialism in eastern Nigeria and how it affected the Igbo people of eastern Nigeria. The first one, Things Fall Apart, deals with the initial wave of colonialism, the initial entrance of the British into Igbo tribal land in Umuofia. The second novel takes place in the 1950s and deals with a soon to be released Nigeria and the issues pertaining there. This novel, however, takes place in the 1920s, and for that reason, it's often considered the second novel in the series. But if you go by publishing order, which I'm doing, it's the third. And it, interestingly enough, it takes place. It takes place in an interesting time. It's after the First World War, and at the point in time when Britain was more interested in creating a functioning colony out of Nigeria, but hadn't yet figured out how to really go about doing that. And so we have an interesting dynamic in this novel, which we don't see in the other two, which I will talk about later. But with all that said, I do want to make it clear that this is an intensely, I would say, personal novel, right? Like, it's about one character, Ezeulu, and his kind of struggles with his religion and the power that he has in relation to the white colonial government. And so I always think it's important to note that though these novels do have a greater significance within the history of Nigeria, they are still about the characters. It's about Okonkwo, it's about Obi, and this novel is about Ezeulu. And I always think that it's important to remember that. And it is something that we are going to talk about. Well, that I'm going to talk about, and you're going to listen to me, hopefully. But we'll get to that. So, the plot of the novel is, as I said, somewhat straightforward. Ezeulu is the chief priest of the chief god of Umuaro, whose name is Ulu. That probably sounds more confusing than he is, but just know that he's probably the most important person in his village. Is all that it means. However, he is not the chief, if you will, the political chief, the king. He is only a priest. At the time, so we see him, and he's doing his festivals and his religious rites and everything along with that. But additionally, we get the point of view of two white people, namely Captain Winterbottom and a man named Clark, who are the local authorities in this part of Nigeria. They have recently been informed that they need to create a chief in the area for the benefit of the colonial regime. It was determined in London, presumably, that it would be best if every village had its own chief, and it was to them that the British government had to deal. This proves problematic, of course, because the Igbo tribe, at this time, I can speak to them now, but at this time, they didn't have chiefs, any chiefs, and it's actually a point of pride for them. So, just keep that in mind. So, Ezeulu, as I said, the chief, the priest of Ulu, is additionally locked in a power struggle with another priest, the priest of another god. Ezedimili is the name of the priest. Uh, it's Edemili is the name of the god. Eze is like the title, right? It means priest, priest of Edemili. Ezeulu is the Eze, the priest, Ulu of Ulu. So there is this internal power struggle going on between them. The novel opens up with Umuofia, not Umuofia. Umuofia is in Things Fall Apart. Umuwaro going to war with another tribe, the Okpuri tribe, to which Ezeulu strongly discourages them. He says, it's not a good war. We cannot fight this war." But with the backing of Ezedimili, the rival priest, Umuwaro decides to go to war, and they start the war. And of course, the white colonial government freaks out. They don't like this. They come in, they end the war, and in a kind of shocking turn of events, Ezeulu, because he thinks of himself as a man of principle, comes forward and says, "No, Umuwaro was in the wrong. My own village was in the wrong, and they're fighting over farmland." But he says, "Okpuri, the land belongs to the other village." And this obviously does not go over well in Umuwaro, but nobody really says anything because he's the chief priest. So later on, 5 years later, I believe, things are going along. Ezeulu decides to send his son to the church school to learn, in his words, so that he can learn the knowledge of the new white people. Right? You need to know about what they believe, what they think, and to get their power in order to protect his people. This again does not go over well. After all, he's the chief priest of Umuwaro, and he's sending his son to become a Christian. This is not good. This is especially not good when his son captures what is called the royal python. All pythons are sacred to Edemili, the rival priest's god. His son captures it and attempts to starve it to death, and this comes out, and it causes a big fight and embarrasses Ezeulu, and it's a whole to-do. But Ezeulu, because the python is for the rival priest, Ezeulu digs in his heels, says, "No, we did nothing wrong. He did not kill the Oduche, his son, did not kill the python. He merely captured the python, and therefore it's not even blasphemous." It's worth noting, not even he believes this, but it is the lie on which he creates his defense. So all of this is going on. We have this power struggle happening, and then in walks the white colonial government. As I said, Ezeulu told the truth as Winterbottom, Captain Winterbottom, the colonial magistrate, believes it to be, and so he has a good opinion of Ezeulu. And when it comes time to choose a chieftain for Umuwaro, he chooses Ezeulu, and he has Ezeulu come over to where he is living in Okpuri, and he offers him, "Would you like to become the chief?" And Ezeulu says, "Absolutely not. We don't have chiefs in Umuwaro. We don't have kings. I'm a priest, and the only thing I want to be is a priest." Winterbottom and Clark, the other white person, do not accept this answer. They are not happy with this answer. This is not what they expected, and they feel that this, their as they term it, this African witch doctor, is embarrassing not just them personally, but the entire colonial administration and the king and London, and it's horrible. They throw him in prison. Ezeulu, up to this point, has been feeling a little hard done by his village because they don't like him. They don't dislike him, but he feels that they have not been treating him as well as they should, because he's been trying to do the right thing. And over the war and because of the python, and now he's in prison, and his village is not doing anything for him. It's the same. It's a similar feeling to how Okonkwo felt in Things Fall Apart. His village isn't standing up the way he wants them to. So he isn't. So Ezeulu remains in prison for a whole month, and this stops him from being able to do his ritual. Now, the most important ritual for the priest of Ulu to perform is to keep track of the village calendar, and he does this by every new moon eating a yam, a sacred yam. Because he's in prison for 2 months, it makes it so that he falls behind on this, and this is a big issue, because when he runs out of yams, that is when he calls the New Yam Feast. The New Yam Feast is the beginning of the harvest season for Umuwaro. But because he's 2 months behind on his yam eating, when the time comes at the normal time of the year comes to harvest the yams, he doesn't call the New Yam Feast. He says, I haven't eaten all of the yams yet. And this causes quite a conundrum, because people don't know what to do. It's time to harvest the food, but they are not allowed to harvest the food, because you cannot harvest the food until the New Yam Feast happens. Otherwise, Ulu will smite you. You will lose the protection of the gods of Umuwaro. This is a big problem. It causes a famine to begin. The novel ends with the son, with another son of Ezeulu succumbing to disease because of the famine, and Ezeulu loses his mind in grief and in anger at his village, and in turn his village begins to convert to Christianity, because the Christian church in Umuwaro says, don't offer your yams to Ezeulu and to Ulu, because they're not protecting you, but we will protect you. And this is the end of the novel. So King Charles III, who is the relatively new King of England, of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and however many royal commonwealths there are, or commonwealth realms there are. And in theory, this makes Charles a very powerful person, as was his mother. The most powerful, or one of the greatest powers that the king wields, is that of royal assent. Royal assent is the constitutional act by which Charles must give his assent to all acts of Parliament. He can, of course, assent to the bill, or he can delay his assent to the bill, which kind of acts as a pocket veto, but he does this as only when he is advised to do it by the Prime Minister. But there is a third option, and this is to refuse assent, to outright say, no, this act of Parliament is not going to become a law. Now, this is an interesting power, because it has never been used in 300 years. The last monarch to refuse assent was Queen Anne in 1708 over a Scottish militia bill, and I bring this up, however, because this is a power that Charles has, but is not really a power that he has, right? If a power has never been used, do you have the power to do it? And this novel opens up with a similar question. As Ezeulu is eating, so it opens up with Ezeulu eating his monthly yam, his yam to keep the calendar on, and he considers what happens if he doesn't eat the yam. What happens if he doesn't call the New Yam Festival? Whenever Ezeulu considered the immensity of his power over the year and the crops, and therefore over the people, he wondered if it was real. It was true he named the day for the feast of the pumpkin leaves and for the new yam feast, but he did not choose it. He was merely a watchman. His power was no more than the power of a child over a goat that was said to be his. As long as the goat was alive, it could be his. He could find it food and take care of it, but the day it was slaughtered, he would know soon enough who the real owner was. No, the chief priest of Ulu was more than that, must be more than that. If he should refuse to name the day, there would be no festival, no planting and no reaping. But could he refuse? No chief priest had ever refused, so it could not be done. He would not dare. What kind of a power was it, if it would never be used? Better to say it was not there. And thus we come to what I would consider the main question of the novel. Does Ezeulu have the power to refuse to do his duty? Does he have the power to not call the New Yam Feast? Does he have the power, if Ulu should so decide, does he have the power to call it against his god's wishes? And we saw, I said in the plot section that obviously he doesn't call the New Yam Feast at the time, but this, of course, was, in his eyes, according to his god's wishes, because he hadn't eaten the monthly yams, therefore he couldn't call the New Yam Feast. But there's a couple ways to understand Ezeulu's actions in the novel. I think the easiest and the most cynical and common reading would be that Ezeulu is angry at his village. He is upset at the way they are treating him, and because of that, he takes it out on them. He intentionally, willfully causes a famine amongst his people in order to punish them, not because it's what his god wants, but because it's what he wants. After all, he does say when he's going home from prison to Umuaro, quote, "I am going home to challenge all those who have been poking their fingers into my face to come outside their gate and meet me in combat, and whoever throws the other will strip him of his anklet." That's an important quote, because it will come up again later. But he does additionally plan the fact that he's going to cause a famine. He knows that he's going to cause a famine if he doesn't call the New Yam Feast, and he knows that he's not going to call the New Yam Feast. And we know that he knows this because he has concerns over it. Quote, "Meanwhile, Ezeulu had pursued again his thoughts on the coming struggle and began to prove with the sensitiveness of a snail's horns the possibility of reconciliation, or, if that was too much, of narrowing down the area of conflict. Behind his thinking was, of course, the knowledge that the fight would not begin until the time of harvest, after 3 moons more, so there was plenty of time." How could we not say, then, that Ezeulu is the cause of his own problems? He created the famine. I would put forward that there is a second reading. Well, there are 3 readings, but the second reading that I would put forward is that what happens if Ezeulu isn't acting of his own will? What happens if instead of using the power to not call the feast, as he said earlier, what happens if it is, in fact, Ulu telling him not to call the feast? Again, Ezeulu has no power. He's not doing it. But instead, his god is doing it. And this is a ridiculous reading in our eyes, because we are so used to thinking in a monotheistic, Abrahamic religious context. There is no Ulu. We know that there is no Ulu, or at least we believe that there is no Ulu. And therefore, to imagine that Ezeulu believes in his god is so foreign to us that we don't even give it credence. We don't think that he could be listening to his god, because we don't believe that there is a god at all. And I think that that is a bias that should probably be overcome, right? And we don't have to believe in Ulu. Obviously, you should not, believe what you want to believe. But in the novel, is it not possible that Ulu exists? Is it not a possibility that even if we don't believe in Ulu, Ezeulu does, and Ulu, therefore, who's to say that he doesn't exist? Like, after all, I mean, Ulu does speak to Ezeulu in the novel. At one point, quote, "Who told you that this was your own fight?" Ezeulu trembled and said nothing, his gaze lowered to the floor. "I say, who told you that this was your own fight to arrange the way it suits you? You want to save your friends who brought you palm wine? He 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 he. Only the insane could sometimes approach the menace and mockery in the laughter of deities, a dry, skeletal laugh. Beware you do not come between me and my victim, or you may receive blows not meant for you. Do you not know what happens when two elephants fight? Go home and sleep, and leave me to settle my quarrel with Idemili, whose envy seeks to destroy that of his python, seeks to destroy me, that his python may again come to power. Now you tell me how it concerns you. I say go home and sleep. As for me and Idemili, we shall fight to the finish, and whoever throws the other down will strip him of his anklet." We assume that it must be Ezeulu who is punishing his people. We assume that Ulu isn't real. We assume that, therefore, the actions, the famine, is caused by Ezeulu. But we discount the idea that possibly Ulu is the one doing it. Ulu does want to punish his people. Now, of course, there is a further reading, and this is the one that I think is the most probable, the most likely, and that is that Ezeulu is Ulu. At several points in the novel, Ezeulu makes mention of the fact that he is both half man and half spirit. When he became the priest of Ulu, he became almost one with the god. He became a messenger of the gods, if you will. And this is the reason I mention this, is because that statement, "As for me and Idemili, we shall fight to the finish, and whoever throws the other down will strip him of his anklet." This is almost word for word what Ezeulu himself said when he was going back home to Umuwaro to start this whole fight. "I'm going home to challenge all those who have been poking their fingers into my face to come outside their gate and meet me in combat, and whoever throws the other will strip him of his anklet." Now, it is possible that this is just an Igbo saying. I don't know, but it is possible. But I think that Chinua Achebe wrote in English, and he would have known that the repetition is important, right? The repetition of phrases like that, of phrases that stand out, is an important key for people to for readers to understand and to see the motivations of the characters. And we see that, is it not? So we see that Ezeulu and Ulu both speak the same words. Is it not possible that, therefore, Ezeulu and Ulu are speaking together, that they are effectively one entity? And now you could read this as to say that, so Ulu doesn't exist. But I would go further to say that maybe Ulu does exist, and maybe Ezeulu is the same. Ezeulu is a mouthpiece for his god, and his god is a mouthpiece for Ezeulu. They are one and the same. And that does not mean that the African polytheistic tradition is fake, but more that it is a different understanding of godhood than we have in Christian thought, in Western thought, I should say, in Abrahamic religious thinking. After all, could it not be that, just like Peter, what Ezeulu binds on earth is bound in heaven, and what he looses on earth is loosed in heaven, and so the very actions of Ezeulu are those of his god? Could it not be that his God speaks through him, and that his God is the reason that he feels the way he does? I think the book is somewhat ambivalent on that topic, on whether or not you believe in Ulu. I don't think it really matters one way or the other, although it does change our understanding of Ezeulu himself, but it does not. It doesn't affect the plot of the novel, certainly. The people of Umuaro take the idea that Ezeulu failed in his duties. He acted independently of his god, and that, quote, in the end, only Umuaro and its leaders saw the final outcome. To them, the issue was simple. Their god had taken sides with them against his headstrong and ambitious priest, and thus upheld the wisdom of their ancestors, that no man, however great, was greater than his people, that no one ever won judgment against his clan. If this was so, then Ulu had chosen a dangerous time to uphold that truth, for in destroying his priest, he had also brought disaster on himself. For a deity who chose a moment such as this to chastise his priest or abandon him before his enemies was inciting people to take liberties, and Umuaro was just right to do so. So the people of Umuaro obviously condemn Ezeulu's actions, but they don't necessarily condemn Ulu, although they do, because we're told that they begin en masse to convert to Christianity. They leave their old gods. They leave Ulu. They leave Edemili and all of the other gods. So it isn't. So we are told that they see that Ulu took sides with them against Ezeulu, but in reality, they took sides against Ezeulu and Ulu, possibly because they understand what is foreign to us, that Ezeulu is the mouthpiece for his god. As what Ezeulu does is what his god wants him to do. And there, I just think it's something that it should be worth noting, that our religious ideas and our religious culture, whether or not you believe you are a Christian or Muslim or Jew or anything to that effect, it doesn't really matter, because we live in a society, I just knocked my camera. We live in a society in which we are inundated with that kind of thinking, that monotheistic thinking, that a polytheistic god is not only not real but could not exist. And I want to make it clear, I'm not advocating for polytheism, but I am advocating that we need to understand that bias does exist on us as readers, and it also exists on Achebe. Achebe was a Christian, or at least his parents were Christian. I didn't see anything that he was that he practiced personally, but his parents certainly were. So he himself is obviously prone to the same biases that we are, and I just think it's worth noting that we should try to overcome that kind of bias. So we should come back to the question of the power. Does Ezeulu have the power to not call the New Yam Feast? Yes. Strictly speaking, he did. But also, he didn't. Not only did Ezeulu not have that power, but Ulu himself did not have that power. As he said at the beginning, he was merely a watchman for the harvest festival. He could not stop the year. He did not have that power, and in trying to wield the power, he ended up not just destroying himself, but destroying his whole religion, his whole priesthood, and upending the life of Umuaro, the traditional African Igbo lifestyle of Umuaro, and giving that power to the British colonial government, which, as I said earlier, is headed by a king, now Charles, who, like Ezeulu, has the power to not give his royal assent But what would happen if Charles didn't do it? I think it's likely to be the same outcome, in which Britain would just say, go away. We'll find somebody else to lead us. Now, whether they would get rid of the monarchy altogether is not the point of this video. But what is that there are certain powers which we give that cannot be used, or could not be used, not because you don't technically have that power, but because to wield that power is to destroy it. And that is something that that is, I believe, the most important part of Things Fall Apart, or of Things Fall Apart, of Arrow of God. So now, having read all three of the African Trilogy by Chinua Achebe, we have seen the transition from a pre-colonial Africa to a nearly post-colonial Africa in no longer at ease. We've seen this transition, and it's a very, I think it's a very interesting thing. It's a very interesting group of books to read, especially in conjunction with each other. And I'm happy I finally did it. I said in the Things Fall Apart video that I had already read Things Fall Apart in high school. And I think on its own, it's probably the weakest of the three, which is interesting to say because it's the only one that most people have ever read. But to read them all together, I think, does paint a very powerful picture. It gives you a powerful picture of Nigeria, and I think it gives the reader a great understanding. It's not just a celebration of, this mythical kind of colonial Africa. It is also I think condemns the bad things, while at the same time providing a sort of a sadness at the change. You see that these men, who are great men in their own right, you watch them as they fail to overcome the colonial regime, a regime that they never fully understand because it is so foreign and so outside of the scope of their worldview. This globe spanning empire is so far beyond what they are capable of even understanding it as being. And I think therein lies the tragedy, that these people had no chance. They had nothing they could have done. We see in Things Fall Apart, Okonkwo wants to fight, but his village doesn't go with him because why would you? You're not going to win. And you see in Arrow of God, by the 1920s, you see the leadership in Africa kind of wishy-washy. Do we fight? Do we not fight? How should we learn about these people? And that, again, by not deciding what to do, they again collapse. And then in No Longer at Ease, we can see the consequences of that. We see that Obi is a person lost in a world that doesn't accept him, and in turn he is no longer accepted by the traditional society. And I just think it's a very good series to see that play out. And I like that it's three separate stories. The next book is, I don't have it, but it is going to be, what is it called? I'll tell you what it is. I'll write it up and you'll know what it is then. Because I cannot for the life of me remember, and I don't even know where I put my copy of it. So that is how it is. But I look forward to talking about it. I look forward to reading it. I'm already most of the way through, but I look forward to talking about it. I hope you guys enjoy these videos. I hope you guys will read the books with me. You should definitely read them. They're good books. Not Jerlaine. Jerlaine was not a good book, but you might want to read it anyway. I don't know. You might be a psychopath. You know, do you? You do you. Read the books. Don't read the books. You should read the books. It's good to read. Yeah, that's it.